Footsteps struck the frozen stones of Castle Valerith, each one swallowed by a silence that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Something in that silence did not belong, though no one walking those halls that night would have guessed how completely it was about to unmake them. The iron gates of the inner ward groaned shut behind the last column of returning soldiers. King Ronan Voss had come home. To the kingdoms beyond Valerith's borders, his name was a warning whispered before sieges and shouted in surrender. Ronan was no ordinary monarch. His line carried the old blood, the gift and burden of the wolf, and he wore the title Alpha King, the way other men wore scars, visibly, permanently, without choice. 3 months of war against the rebel clans of the eastern passes had ended in victory. It had also ended, somewhere along the frozen ridgelines, with something inside him going quiet that he could not name. In the great hall, his warriors toasted his name. Firelight, mead, and laughter spilled from the windows, bleeding into the courtyard, like warmth he could no longer reach. Nobles would want his attention by morning. Petitions, treaties, the endless arithmetic of holding a kingdom together. Tonight, though, none of it called to him louder than the silence beyond the castle walls. He turned from the hall and walked instead toward the old royal barn, set apart near the edge of the grounds, where stable hands had long since learned not to follow him. The barn had always been the one place his crown couldn't reach. The air cooled as he crossed the yard, snow crunching beneath his boots, lantern light flickering gold against drifts that had buried the world since dusk. He breathed in the scent that waited for him beyond those doors. Hay, leather, old wood, the warm musk of horses settling for the night. It had grounded him since he was a boy too small to lift his father's sword. He needed that grounding now, more than he needed any feast. He pushed the heavy doors open and stopped. Beneath the hay and leather, something else moved through the air. Sharp, copper, unmistakable. Blood. Beneath that, something wilder still. Fur and musk, the unmistakable signature of a wolf that did not belong to him, or to any wolf sworn to his kingdom. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button, and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. Ronan's golden eyes sharpened in the dark. Every instinct honed by months of war rose at once, the wolf inside him surging toward the surface, demanding answers. No creature crossed into Valerith's walls without his knowledge. No wolf set foot on his territory and lived to explain why, not unless he allowed it. His hand found the hilt of his sword before his mind had finished the thought. Steel slid free with a low hiss, and he advanced into the dark with the silence of a man who had killed before and would again without hesitation, if the night demanded it. He followed the scent past the empty stalls, past a black warhorse stamping uneasily in its pen, toward the far corner, where the lantern light barely reached. The light caught movement first. Fur, pale silver grey, thick as a winter cloud bank, rising and falling with slow, deliberate breath. Then he saw her. A woman lay curled in the hay, copper hair spilling loose across her shoulders, her plain dress torn at the sleeve, her hands raw, as though she'd crawled farther than her body had any right to carry her. She didn't stir. Whatever had brought her here had taken the last of her strength to do it, and standing over her, between her and the door, between her and him, was the wolf. It was enormous, larger than any wolf born in Valerith's forests, its coat catching the lantern light like frost on stone, its lips drawn back from teeth built for killing. Its eyes, when they found Ronan's, held no fear at all, only warning. Ronan's gaze dropped, and understanding hit him a heartbeat too late. The wolf's belly hung heavy and round beneath her. She was pregnant, close to her time by the look of her, and she had placed her own body, vulnerable and burdened, between a stranger and an armed king, rather than save herself. That made no sense to him. Wolves did not die for humans. Certainly not for ones they had no claim over. "Move away from her," Ronan said, low and even, command bred into his voice by right of blood. The wolf answered with a growl that rattled the rafters. He pressed harder, releasing the weight of his alpha will into the room. The invisible force every wolf in his kingdom had been born knowing how to obey. Submit. Her paws dug into the dirt. Her whole body shook with the effort of resisting him. And still, impossibly, she didn't move. She only stepped closer to the woman in the hay, lowering her head over her like a shield of muscle and fur, ready to die exactly where she stood. For the first time since the war had ended, Ronan felt something other than exhaustion. He felt astonishment. A ragged breath broke the tension. The woman's eyes opened, unfocused, then sharpened with fear, as they found the king standing over her with a drawn sword. "Please," she whispered, forcing herself up on shaking arms, dragging her body in front of the wolf instead of behind it. "Don't hurt her. She saved my life." Ronan's sword lowered an inch without his permission. "What is your name?" She hesitated, as though the answer cost her something. "Bianca." One word. That was all it took. The moment her name left her lips, something ancient stirred awake inside him. A recognition no crown, no war, no winter had prepared him for. The bond every alpha both longed for and feared settled over him like a verdict handed down by the gods themselves. His fated mate was not a noblewoman waiting in some southern court. She was a stranger, half-starved in his own barn, guarded by a wolf that should not exist, carrying secrets that would soon unravel everything Ronan believed about his brother, his throne, and the war he thought he had already won. He had walked into the barn searching for an hour of silence. He had found, instead, the beginning of everything. The bond did not loosen its grip simply because Ronan willed it to. He stood there a moment longer than a king should, sword still lowered, eyes still locked on the woman who had just upended everything he understood about fate. Then duty reasserted itself, the way it always did, smothering wonder beneath necessity. "You cannot stay in this barn," he said. "Either of you." The wolf's growl had not fully faded, but it had dulled to something watchful rather than violent. Bianca struggled to her knees, one hand pressed to the wolf's flank, as though to steady them both. "She won't let you take me anywhere," Bianca warned. "She will, if you ask her to." It was not a question. Bianca studied him for a long moment, too long for a frightened servant girl, too steady for someone who should have been begging for her life. Then she turned and murmured something low against the wolf's ear, and the great beast's shoulders eased, though her golden eyes never once left the king. Ronan led them through the servants' passage rather than the main hall, unwilling to explain a pregnant wolf to half his court before he understood it himself. He brought them to a locked chamber in the old east wing, far from prying eyes, and set guards he trusted at the door. Though trust, he was beginning to suspect, was a luxury he could no longer afford carelessly. Inside, by firelight, he finally looked at her properly. Even ragged and starved, there was something in the line of her spine that didn't belong to a farmhand. "Your name is Bianca," he said. "What else? Does it matter?" "It matters to the man whose barn you collapsed in." She wrapped her arms around herself, and for the first time, he saw not fear but calculation. A woman deciding how much truth she could afford to spend. "I worked the Hollow Farms, 3 days south of here. That's all you need to know." "That is not all I need to know." He crossed the room slowly, the way he might approach a cornered animal, though he suspected she would not appreciate the comparison. A farmhand does not carry herself like she's used to being obeyed. A farmhand does not stare down an alpha king without flinching. Something cracked behind her eyes. Just a hair's width, but he caught it. "My name," she said finally, "was Bianca Everwin." The name meant nothing to him at first, and then, slowly, it meant everything. The Everwins had once held the Western Valleys, lands rich enough to rival a duchy, loyalty old enough to predate his own father's reign. He hadn't heard the name spoken in years, not since the scandal. "Your father was executed for treason he never committed." Her voice didn't break, but it came close. "They said he sold border maps to the rebel clans. They never proved it. They didn't need to. My cousin needed our lands, and a dead traitor's daughter doesn't inherit anything." Darius Malvern. A flicker of surprise crossed her face that he knew the name. "He sent men after me within a week of the execution. I cut my hair. I burned anything that marked me as nobility. I learned to disappear into kitchens and stables, where no one looks twice at a girl, with dirt under her nails." She glanced toward the wolf, who had settled near the hearth, but kept one eye on Ronan regardless. "I found her 3 months ago, caught in a hunter's snare, half-starved, pregnant, and dying. I had nothing. No food worth sharing, no shelter worth offering, and I gave her what little I had anyway. Why? Because no one was going to do it for her. I understood that better than most. Ronan said nothing for a long moment. He had seen soldiers break under siege, watched nobles betray their own blood for an inch of land. And yet here was a woman, with nothing left to her name, who had bled herself dry for a dying animal that owed her nothing in return. His wolf stirred beneath his skin, not with hunger or aggression, but with something far more unsettling. Protectiveness. The same instinct that had once made him stand over fallen soldiers on the battlefield, refusing to let the enemy take what remained of them. You hide pain well, he said quietly. Better than most queens I've met. I'm not a queen. No, he agreed. You're something else entirely. I haven't decided what yet. She looked away, and he let the silence stretch, studying the careful way she held her shoulders, the practiced stillness of someone who had spent months teaching her body not to flinch at sudden movement. Whatever she had survived, it had cost her more than she would admit. He almost let it rest there. Almost. My brother, he said instead, watching her closely, died 3 years ago. Assassins, the records claim, though we never found the bodies that did it. The wolf's head snapped up so fast, the fire guttered in the draft of her movement. A sound tore from her throat that was not quite a growl, and not quite a cry. Something raw, something that shook the stones of the chamber and sent the guards outside reaching for their blades. Bianca went rigid. She's never done that before. Ronan stared at the wolf, every instinct in him sharpening to a single, undeniable point. She knew his brother's name, and whatever she knew, it was about to tear his kingdom open at the seams. The sound still echoed in Ronan's bones, long after it had died in the stone chamber. He moved toward the wolf slowly, the way he might approach a wounded soldier rather than a beast, and knelt before her, despite every instinct that told an alpha king never to lower himself before anything. Up close, in the firelight, he saw what he had missed in the panic of the barn. The markings along her flank weren't random. They formed a pattern he recognized. Faint silver striping along the shoulder, the kind passed only through bloodlines bound to the old houses. And beneath the wildness of her scent, beneath fear and exhaustion, there was something else, something achingly familiar. I know that scent, he murmured, more to himself than to Bianca. What do you mean? He didn't answer right away. He reached out, carefully, deliberately, and let his palm rest against the wolf's great head. She didn't snap at him. She didn't even flinch. She only watched him with eyes that held something close to recognition of her own. Seraphine, he said. The wolf went utterly still. Bianca's breath caught. You know her. I should have known her the moment I saw her. Ronan's voice had dropped to something raw, something he rarely allowed himself in front of anyone. She was my brother's mate, Tomas's mate. She disappeared the same week he was murdered. Everyone believed the assassins took her too. We searched the eastern forests for a month and found nothing but blood and silence. She survived, Bianca whispered. She survived, Ronan repeated, and the weight of those 2 words seemed to settle over the entire room. He looked at the wolf's swollen belly with new eyes, and something cold moved through his chest as the pieces locked into place. She's pregnant. I told you that already. You don't understand. He rose to his feet, pacing now, his mind racing faster than his legs could carry him. If this child is Tomas's, then it's the last heir of your brother's bloodline, Bianca finished. The one person who could challenge whoever benefited from his death. Ronan stopped pacing. For 3 years, the kingdom had mourned Tomas as a tragedy of war, a prince cut down by rebels who slipped past the border patrols in the night. Ronan had grieved him as such, buried an empty tomb for him as such, but a hidden mate, surviving in wolf form for 3 years, carrying a child no one knew existed, that was not the shape of a random assassination. That was the shape of something planned. Someone wanted him gone, Ronan said slowly. Not the rebels. Someone who knew exactly where to find him, exactly when he'd be unguarded, and exactly what to do with anyone who might carry on his line afterward. Someone close to him, someone close to me. The realization settled like a blade between his ribs. Whoever had ordered his brother's death had moved within his own walls, had likely stood beside him at the funeral, had probably offered condolences with the same hands that signed the order. Bianca wrapped her arms tighter around herself, and for a moment her composure slipped, revealing the fear beneath it. There's something else you should know. Tell me. My cousin, Darius Malvern. He didn't just want my family's lands. He wanted power he could never earn through blood alone. He spent years building alliances with houses that resented your father's rule. I heard the rumors before I ran. He wasn't just hungry for my inheritance. He was hungry for the throne itself. Ronan's jaw tightened. He had met Darius twice at court, an ambitious man with a courtier's smile and a soldier's eyes, always one step removed from any accusation that might stick to him. He had never trusted the man, but he had never suspected him of reaching this far either. He couldn't have done this alone, Ronan said, not from outside the castle. Someone here would have needed to open the doors for him. The thought arrived with the force of a physical blow, and he hated how quickly it took shape. Cassian Vale, his most trusted advisor, the man who had served his father before him, who had taught Ronan the weight of ruling before he'd ever worn the crown, who knew every guard rotation, every hidden passage, every secret the castle kept within its walls. Calm, brilliant, endlessly patient. The very qualities that made him invaluable were the same qualities that would make him dangerous, if loyalty were ever the lie. "What is it?" Bianca asked, watching the color drain from his face. "If someone inside Valerith helped Darius reach my brother," Ronan said quietly, "there are very few men with the access to do it. And one of them has had my ear for 15 years. Seraphine let out a low, mournful sound, as though she understood the name forming behind his silence even before he spoke it. Ronan looked toward the door of the chamber, toward the castle beyond it, full of familiar faces he had trusted his entire life, and felt, for the first time since the war ended, truly afraid. The enemy was no longer somewhere beyond his borders. It was already inside his walls. By morning, the rumors had already begun to crawl through the castle, like smoke under a door. Ronan heard the first whisper from a stable hand, who swore he'd heard a wolf's cry from the east wing. He heard the second from a kitchen maid, who claimed the guards posted outside the old chamber had been doubled overnight for no reason anyone could explain. By midday, he heard the third version from Cassian Vale himself, delivered with the same calm, measured concern the man had offered for 15 years. "There's talk of a beast within the walls, my king," Cassian said, falling into step beside him in the corridor. "Some claim it threatened the stable hands. Others say it's already mauled someone. I'd like your permission to search the grounds before panic spreads further than it already has." Ronan kept his face carefully unreadable, though every instinct screamed at the wrongness of having this conversation at all. "There is no beast loose in my castle, Cassian. I'd have known." "Of course." A pause, brief and precise. "Forgive my caution. I only wish to keep you safe." The words should have comforted him. Instead, they settled like ice along his spine. He found Bianca in the hidden chamber an hour later, pacing the length of the room, while Seraphine lay curled near the hearth, her great sides rising and falling with the particular weariness of a creature carrying more than her own weight. "We need to move you," Ronan said without preamble. "Both of you. Cassian is already searching for a wolf in the castle. It's only a matter of time before someone connects the rumors to this wing. Move us where? I'll dress you as a noble guest from the southern provinces, a distant cousin of a minor house, here for a season at court. No one questions another bored lady wandering the gardens." He glanced toward Seraphine. "She'll go to the old hunting lodge beyond the orchard. I'll have it guarded by men I trust with my life." "You mean men you think you can trust?" Bianca crossed her arms. "Given what we now suspect about Cassian, are you certain that list is shorter than you'd like to believe?" "It's the best option we have. It's not the only one. I've survived on instinct and nothing else for 3 months. I don't need a king deciding my fate for me, like I'm a piece to be moved on a board. I'm trying to keep you alive. I've kept myself alive without you." Her voice cracked slightly at the edges, though her spine never bent. "I don't need rescuing, Ronan. I need a plan that doesn't ask me to disappear into someone else's name again." He stopped, struck by the steel beneath her exhaustion. He had commanded armies, broken sieges, stood unflinching before enemies twice his size, and yet this woman, half-starved and hunted, refused to be managed by him the way everyone else in his life had learned to be managed. It should have frustrated him. Instead, something in his chest loosened. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "I'm not used to anyone refusing my orders." "Then it's good for you," she said, though the edge in her voice had softened. "A king should remember not everyone bends just because he commands it." He studied her for a long moment, the firelight catching the exhaustion she tried so hard to hide. I haven't trusted anyone in years. Not truly. Every face at court smiles for a reason that serves them. I stopped looking for honesty after my brother died, because I couldn't tell anymore who was grieving him and who was simply waiting for me to fail the same way he did. That sounds lonely. It is what a crown demands. A crown doesn't demand loneliness, Bianca said softly. Men convince themselves it does, because it's easier than risking betrayal again. But a crown is just metal, Ronan. It's not what decides whether you're alone. He had no answer for that. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't want one. It was Bianca who found the parchment, tucked behind a loose stone near the hearth, where some previous occupant of the chamber had hidden it. Perhaps a servant, perhaps someone with far more dangerous reasons to need a hiding place no one would think to search. She unfolded it with careful fingers and went pale. Ronan. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took it from her. The handwriting was precise, deliberate. A hand trained in court correspondence, not the scrawl of some hired blade. 2 names were referenced in careful, coded phrasing he recognized only because he'd spent years reading Cassian's reports. And beneath it, a single line that turned his blood to ice. The heir must die before sunrise. Bianca's hand found his arm, gripping tight. They know. Ronan stared at the words until they blurred, his wolf rising beneath his skin with a fury he hadn't allowed himself in years. Then we have until sunrise, he said, to make certain they fail. Seraphine's first cry of pain came an hour before midnight, and it tore through the hidden chamber like a blade through silk. Ronan was on his feet before he'd finished registering the sound, every instinct in him screaming toward the nearest solution he understood. I'll send for the physicians. No. Bianca was already moving, dragging blankets from the cot, kicking aside anything that might be in the way. You will do no such thing. She's in pain, Bianca. This is beyond either of us. It's beyond a physician, Ronan. What do you think happens the moment some royal healer walks into this room and sees a wolf giving birth to your brother's heir? She didn't look up from her work, her hands steady, despite the urgency in her voice. Cassian has eyes in every wing of this castle. The moment a physician is summoned in secret, word will reach him before the hour is out. We are not calling anyone. Then what do you suggest we do? She finally looked at him, and there was nothing fragile left in her expression. I suggest you start listening to me. He had commanded armies. He had given orders that decided the fates of thousands without a flicker of hesitation. And yet, in that moment, he found himself obeying a woman with dirt still beneath her fingernails, as though she were the only person in Valerith who knew what came next. Boil water. Clean cloths, as many as you can find without raising questions. Something for her to bite down on, if it comes to that. Bianca knelt beside Seraphine, pressing a hand to the wolf's heaving side. And shut that door. Whatever happens next, no one outside this room can hear it. Ronan obeyed. He had spent years believing strength wore the shape of swords and crowns and armies marching at his back. He watched Bianca now, exhausted, hunted, a woman who'd survived on nothing for months, issue commands with the calm precision of a general, and understood, with a clarity that humbled him, that he had been wrong about strength his entire life. The hours that followed blurred into something neither of them would fully remember afterward. Seraphine's labor came in violent waves, her great body racked with pain that pulled sounds from her too raw to be called anything but suffering. Bianca never once flinched. She murmured to the wolf in a low, steady voice, the same voice she must have used in some farmhouse stable to calm a frightened animal. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. You've done this before, Ronan said at one point, watching her hands move with practiced certainty. I helped birth lambs and foals on the hollow farms. Wolves aren't so different. She wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist. Mostly, you just have to not be afraid. Animals know when you're afraid. I'm not afraid. You're gripping that cloth like it owes you money, Ronan. He looked down. She was right. He set it down carefully, and for the first time in hours, something close to a smile flickered across her exhausted face. Near dawn, Seraphine's cries reached a pitch that brought Ronan's heart into his throat, and then, all at once, the room fell into a silence, more terrifying than any sound that had come before it. Bianca, wait. A small, thin cry broke the silence. Bianca moved fast, gathering something from beneath Seraphine, and Ronan braced himself for the sight of a wolf pup. small and silver, the last fragile thread of his brother's bloodline given fur and bone. Instead, he froze. In Bianca's arms lay a human child, a newborn boy, skin still slick from birth, a shock of silver-white hair already visible against his small head, the unmistakable mark of the old bloodline, the same shade Ronan's grandfather had carried, the same shade painted in the portrait of Tomas as a boy. "That's not possible," Ronan whispered. "He shifted," Bianca breathed, wonder cracking through her exhaustion. "Before he ever took his first breath as a wolf, he shifted." Seraphine, depleted and trembling, lifted her head, just enough to look at the child, and something in her golden eyes, relief, grief, love, all tangled together, told Ronan everything he needed to know. This was his brother's son. The heir everyone believed had died with Tomas 3 years ago. Alive, breathing, real. Ronan knelt slowly, his hand trembling as he reached toward the child, and for a moment, the weight of the crown, the betrayal closing in around him, the war waiting beyond sunrise, all of it fell away beneath the simple, staggering fact of his nephew's existence. "He survived," Ronan said. "Thomas's son survived." "He did." Bianca's voice was raw with exhaustion, and something gentler beneath it. "Now we have to make sure he keeps surviving." The words had barely left her lips when the first blow struck the chamber door. Wood groaned against iron. A second blow followed, harder, more deliberate, and then a third that sent dust raining from the old beams above them. Seraphine's head snapped toward the sound, a low, exhausted growl rising in her throat, despite her depleted strength. Bianca clutched the newborn tighter against her chest, and Ronan rose to his feet, sword already in hand, his body sliding between the door and everything he had just sworn to protect. The pounding came again, harder than before. Someone had found them. The door gave way on the fourth blow, splintering inward in a shower of broken wood and dust. Ronan stood ready, sword raised, his body a wall between the doorway and everything he loved. Soldiers poured through the breach first, 6 of them, armored, blades drawn, and behind them, unhurried, almost serene, walked the one face Ronan had least wanted to see. Cassian Vale stepped over the ruined door, as though he were entering a council chamber, rather than a battlefield, his expression composed in the same calm, measured lines it always wore. "My king," Cassian said, and the title sounded like mockery in his mouth. "I had hoped it wouldn't come to this." "Cassian." Ronan's voice was low, dangerous, every word weighted with a fury he'd never once turned on the man before him. "Tell me this is some misunderstanding I can still forgive." "I'm afraid not." Cassian's gaze drifted past him, to Bianca crouched protectively over the newborn, to Seraphine struggling weakly to rise despite her exhaustion. 3 years of careful work, undone by a wolf who refused to die in the snare she was meant to die in. The confession landed like a physical blow. "You," Ronan breathed. "The snare, the assassins who took my brother, all of it. I helped plan all of it, yes." Cassian's calm never wavered, not even as he said it. Thomas was a sentimental fool who would have bled this kingdom dry, with mercy and treaties no one respected. Darius understood what Valerith truly needed: strength, ambition, a ruler willing to do what softer men wouldn't. "You served my father for 15 years. I served whoever could secure the throne's future. Your father, then you. Now it seems, Darius." Cassian's eyes finally settled on the child in Bianca's arms, and something cold and final entered his voice. "Give me the boy, Ronan. Surrender the crown peacefully, and I'll see that you're granted exile rather than execution. That's more mercy than you deserve, given how close you came to ruining everything." "And Bianca, the girl dies." Cassian said it the way a man might discuss the weather. Darius wants his cousin's claim erased entirely. No survivors to dispute the lands once they're his. Bianca's arms tightened around the newborn, her eyes burning with a fury that had nothing left of fear in it. "You'll have to kill me first." "That," Cassian said, almost gently, "was always the plan." He raised a hand, and the soldiers surged forward. Ronan met the first of them before he'd taken 2 steps, his sword carving through the man's guard with a speed that came from years of war. Not fury alone, but fury rose in him now regardless. Fury for his brother, for the years stolen from a nephew who hadn't drawn breath an hour ago, for the betrayal of a man he'd trusted since boyhood. His wolf surged up beneath his skin, No longer something to be controlled, but something to be unleashed. Bones shifted. Claws tore free where fingers had been. His eyes burned amber gold, and the soldier nearest him stumbled back a step, before Ronan's transformed strength ended the fight entirely. He moved through the next two attackers like a storm finally given permission to break, his alpha power flooding the room until even the soldiers still standing hesitated, some primal instinct in them recognizing a predator far stronger than themselves. "Protect him," Ronan snarled toward Bianca, voice half-shifted, barely human. "Whatever happens to me, protect him." Bianca retreated toward the far corner, shielding the newborn with her own body, snatching up a fallen blade with her free hand, despite the child cradled against her chest. She would not run. She had told him as much already, and she meant to prove it now. Ronan fought like the legends whispered about him in rival kingdoms, claws and steel and fury given form, soldiers falling before him one after another, until only Cassian remained standing amid the wreckage, his composure finally beginning to crack at the edges. "Impressive," Cassian said, retreating a step. "Truly, I'd almost forgotten what you were capable of. Surrender now, and I might let you live long enough to stand trial." "I think not." Cassian's hand moved to his belt, and what he drew was not a soldier's blade. It gleamed dull and pale in the torchlight. A metal Ronan's instincts recognized a heartbeat too late to matter. Silver. Ronan lunged anyway, too consumed by momentum and rage to pull back, and Cassian's blade found the gap beneath his ribs, with a precision that spoke of careful planning, not desperation. Pain unlike anything Ronan had ever known tore through him. Not the clean agony of steel, but something deeper, something that burned through muscle and bone, like poison given a blade's edge. His legs gave out beneath him. "No!" Bianca's scream tore through the chamber. Ronan hit the stone floor, his vision already darkening at the edges, his wolf's strength bleeding out of him as fast as the blood pooling beneath him. Above him, Cassian's calm composure had returned entirely, the silver blade still clutched in his steady hand. "The Alpha King falls," Cassian said softly, almost to himself. Exactly as planned. Ronan's last sight before the darkness swallowed him whole was Bianca, fierce, unbroken, placing herself between Cassian and the newborn child with nothing but a stolen blade and a fury that burned brighter than any fear. Ronan's blood spread dark across the stone, and for a moment the world narrowed to nothing but the silver poison burning through his veins like liquid fire. Cassian stepped over him without hurry, the way a man steps over something already decided. "You should have surrendered when I offered it." Bianca didn't move. Not back, not away. Only closer. The newborn still cradled against her chest with one arm, the stolen blade steady in her other hand. Despite the trembling, she refused to let reach her voice. "Get away from him. You're in no position to give orders, girl." Cassian's gaze flicked toward the child, calculating, patient. "Set the boy down. This doesn't have to end in more bloodshed than it already has. It already has more bloodshed than it needed." Her eyes cut to the fallen soldiers, to Ronan's unmoving body, to Seraphine struggling weakly against the wall, too depleted from birth to do more than bare her teeth. "You did all of that, not me." Spoken like someone who's never had to make the hard choices a kingdom requires. "I watched my father die for choices he never made," Bianca said, and something in her voice had gone cold, precise, utterly without fear. "Don't lecture me about hard choices, Cassian Vale." He advanced a step, silver blade still wet with Ronan's blood. Bianca's mind raced faster than her racing heart. She had no soldier's training, no alpha's strength, nothing but a stolen sword, and 3 months of learning to survive on instinct alone. But instinct, she had learned, was its own kind of weapon. She backed toward the hearth, slow and deliberate, drawing his attention away from where Ronan lay. "Running won't save the boy," Cassian said, following exactly as she intended. "I'm not running." Her free hand closed around the iron poker resting against the hearthstones, and the moment Cassian's blade rose to strike, she swept the poker through the bed of embers and flung a shower of burning ash directly into his face. Cassian staggered back with a cry, one hand flying to his scorched eyes, the silver blade clattering from his grip as he fought to clear his vision. It was all the opening Bianca needed. She didn't hesitate. She drove her shoulder into him with every ounce of desperate strength left in her body, sending him crashing into the same stone wall that had borne the weight of his treachery for years. "Seraphine!" she called. The wolf, depleted as she was, found enough strength to lunge forward and pin Cassian beneath her weight, her jaws closing around his forearm, with enough pressure to make him scream rather than break bone. A warning, not yet a killing blow. Behind them, a low groan broke the chaos. Ronan stirred. Bianca's heart leapt into her throat as she turned, still holding the newborn close, and found the Alpha King forcing himself up onto one elbow, despite the silver poison still burning through him. "Ronan, I'm not finished yet," he rasped, though his voice was barely more than a growl scraped raw. His amber eyes found Cassian pinned beneath Seraphine's weight, and something feral and unyielding rose in him, even through the pain. "Hold him!" He dragged himself upright by sheer will alone. One hand pressed against the wound at his ribs, blood still seeping dark between his fingers. Every step toward Cassian looked like it might be his last, and yet he kept moving, kept rising, refusing to let the poison claim what Cassian had tried to take from him. "You should be dead," Cassian spat from beneath Seraphine's hold, blood and ash streaking his face. "Silver weakens an alpha," Ronan said, kneeling slowly before the man who had betrayed his family for 15 years of false loyalty. "It doesn't kill one. You should have studied your enemy more carefully before you tried to end him." He wrapped a bloodied hand around Cassian's throat. Not to kill, though every instinct screamed for it, but to hold him still as the last of the fight drained out of the man who had once taught him how to rule. "Why?" Ronan demanded. "After everything my father gave you, everything I trusted you with." "Because your father built a kingdom on sentiment," Cassian rasped. "And sentiment doesn't survive when ambitious men decide they want more. Darius's ambition, not yours." "Mine as much as his," Cassian admitted, something almost like pride flickering through his pain. "I wanted to be remembered as the man who built a stronger Valarith. Instead, I'll be remembered as the man who failed to kill an Alpha King and his mate." "You'll be remembered as a traitor," Ronan said, "and nothing more." Bianca knelt beside him as the guards he trusted, the few who hadn't been compromised, finally burst through the broken door, drawn at last by the sounds of battle. They bound Cassian's wrists in iron and silver-threaded chains before he could so much as attempt another escape. His calm composure finally, completely shattered. Ronan sagged against Bianca's shoulder, the adrenaline of the fight finally giving way to the wound still bleeding beneath his ribs. "We have him." "We do." Bianca pressed a trembling hand against his wound, slowing the bleeding as best she could. But Cassian wasn't working alone. Ronan's eyes, heavy with exhaustion and pain, found hers anyway, sharp enough to hold the thought clearly, despite everything his body had endured. "Darius," he said. "Darius," she agreed quietly, glancing down at the sleeping child still cradled safely in her arms. The heir Cassian had failed to take, the bloodline that had survived against every plan made to erase it. And he doesn't yet know he's already lost. Cassian Vale confessed everything, within 3 days of his capture. He had little choice in the matter. Ronan's healers tended his wounds only long enough to keep him alive for questioning, and once the silver poison had been drawn from the king's blood, Ronan himself sat across from his former advisor, with a patience that frightened the guards more than any show of fury could have. Cassian gave them names, dates, the careful architecture of 3 years of betrayal. He gave them letters bearing Darius Malvin's seal, hidden ledgers tracking gold, moved between accounts that should never have touched each other, and finally, the confession that mattered most of all. Bianca's father had never sold a single border map to the rebel clans. The treason had been fabricated from the beginning, a convenient lie to clear the Everwin lands for Darius to claim. Word spread through Valarith faster than any royal decree could have managed alone. By the time soldiers rode out to bring Darius Malvin back in chains, the kingdom had already begun rewriting the story it told itself. The farmhand found half dead in the royal barn was no farmhand at all, but Lady Bianca Everwin, daughter of a man wrongly executed, who had survived assassins, hidden her name for months, and somehow, against every possible odd, saved the last heir of the royal bloodline from the very men who had murdered his father. Darius did not go quietly. He arrived at the capital under heavy guard, still proclaiming his innocence to anyone who would listen, his composure cracking further with every mile that brought him closer to a throne room full of evidence he could no longer deny. "This is a fabrication," he insisted, kneeling before Ronan in the great hall, the same hall where his soldiers had once celebrated Ronan's homecoming. Cassian's word means nothing. He's a traitor, desperate to drag others down with him. Cassian's word means a great deal, Ronan said, when paired with ledgers bearing your seal, and a wolf who recognized your scent the moment you stepped through these doors. Seraphine, standing now at Bianca's side, fully recovered and fiercely protective of the sleeping child in her arms, bared her teeth at the sound of Darius's voice, a confirmation more damning than any document. The lands you stole from House Everwyn are restored, effective immediately, Ronan continued, his voice carrying the full weight of a king who had finally stopped doubting his own judgment. Lord Everwyn's name is cleared of all treason, posthumously and publicly, before every noble house in this hall. And you, Darius Malvern, will spend whatever remains of your life in the deepest cell beneath this castle, contemplating exactly how thoroughly your ambition has failed. Darius's protests dissolved into silence as the guards dragged him away, and for the first time since the war had ended, Ronan felt something close to peace settle over his shoulders. The celebration that followed was unlike anything the castle had seen in years. Not the hollow, exhausted toasting of a victory that had cost too much, but something warmer, something that felt earned. The people of Valerith, who had spent weeks whispering rumors about a wolf within the castle walls, now spoke a different story entirely, a story of a hunted noblewoman who had given everything to save a stranger, a wolf, and ultimately the kingdom itself. Ronan found Bianca standing apart from the celebration, near the same gardens where she had first been disguised as a southern noble weeks earlier, watching the lanterns glow gold against the evening sky. "You should be inside," he said, coming to stand beside her. "They're toasting your name in there. I've never been comfortable with crowds celebrating me." She glanced at him, a small, tired smile breaking through her exhaustion. "I spent months trying to disappear. It's strange, being seen again." "You don't have to disappear anymore." "No," she agreed softly. "I suppose I don't." He turned to face her fully, and whatever composure a king was meant to carry into such moments abandoned him entirely. "Bianca, I need you to understand something. What I felt the night I found you in that barn, the bond, the pull of fate, none of that is why I'm standing here now." "Then why are you?" "Because I've spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from my crown. And you never once asked me for anything, because you faced down an Alpha King's command without flinching, then faced down a traitor with nothing but a poker and the iron of your own will. Because somewhere between that barn and this garden, I stopped seeing fate's choice standing beside me, and started seeing the woman I love instead." Bianca's breath caught, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, the lanterns flickering gold around them like witnesses to something neither fate nor crown had decided alone. "I'm asking you," Ronan continued, his voice steady, despite the unfamiliar vulnerability beneath it, "not as the man the bond chose for you, but as the man who chooses you freely, to stand beside me, to become Luna of Valerith. Not because the gods demanded it, but because I cannot imagine ruling this kingdom, or living this life, without you in it." Bianca's eyes shone in the lantern light, the exhaustion of months finally giving way to something brighter, something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for since the night her world had first been torn apart. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Ronan, I choose you too." Behind them, faint and warm, Seraphine's contented sound carried across the garden, the closest thing to a blessing a wolf could offer the two people who had saved her son, her kingdom, and in the end, each other. Spring had come early to Valerith, the kind of thaw that old farmers swore meant a kinder year ahead. And for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, the kingdom seemed inclined to believe them. 6 months had passed since the night the barn doors had splintered open beneath Cassian's soldiers. Darius rotted in his cell beneath the castle, stripped of every title he'd schemed to steal. Cassian awaited a tribunal of nobles who would decide his fate with far less mercy than he'd ever shown others. And the kingdom that had once whispered fearful rumors of a wolf within the walls now spoke of Seraphine with something closer to reverence, the wolf who had carried a kingdom's future inside her, who had stood between an Alpha King and death itself, rather than abandon the woman who'd saved her life. She lived now in the royal gardens rather than a hidden lodge, free to roam as she pleased, her son growing safely under guard that no longer needed to hide in shadows. The boy, named Thomas, after the father he would never meet, but whose memory would shape him regardless, had already begun shifting between forms, with a control that startled the castle's oldest healers. He would grow into his uncle's protection and his mother's quiet strength, and Valerith would be steadier for it. Bianca stood now on the same balcony where Ronan had once watched the kingdom celebrate a victory that brought him no peace. She wore no farmhand's rags, no borrowed noble's disguise. She wore the deep silver and midnight blue of Valerith's Luna, a circlet resting against dark copper hair that had finally grown long enough to braid the old way, the way her mother had taught her, before treason and grief had stolen that life from her entirely. She was not a hunted noble anymore. She was not a forgotten girl hiding her name in farmhouses 3 days from anyone who might recognize her. She was Luna of Valerith, chosen freely by an alpha king who had learned, slowly and painfully, that strength wore many shapes, and that the truest among them rarely looked like a crown. Ronan found her there as the sun began its slow descent over the orchard, the same orchard that bordered the old hunting lodge where Seraphine had once hidden, the same grounds that had nearly become a battlefield before the kingdom found its footing again. "You're thinking about that night," Bianca said, without turning. She had learned, in 6 months, to read the particular stillness that settled over him whenever his thoughts wandered backward. "I am." He came to stand beside her, resting his forearms against the cold stone railing. "I keep returning to it. The barn, the silence I thought I needed. What do you remember most?" He considered the question longer than it required, watching the lanterns begin their nightly flicker across the courtyard below, the same lanterns that had guided his steps that frozen evening, though the kingdom they illuminated now bore little resemblance to the one he'd walked through then. "I remember thinking I'd found a threat," he said finally. "A wolf inside my walls, blood on the hay, everything my instincts screamed I needed to destroy before it destroyed me first." He glanced at her, something soft breaking through the composure a king wore like armor. "I was so certain I understood what I'd found. I couldn't have been more wrong." "What did you find then, if not a threat?" "Everything," he said simply. "I went looking for an hour of silence, Bianca. Instead I found my mate, curled half dead in the hay, with more courage in her than half the soldiers I'd commanded into battle. I found my brother's son, alive when the entire kingdom had mourned him as lost. I found the truth about men I'd trusted my whole life, and the family I never knew I still had left to protect." Below them, in the orchard, Seraphine's distant howl rose into the evening air. Not the mournful sound of a creature in danger, but something warmer, something content, calling her son home as the light began to fade. Bianca smiled at the sound, the kind of smile that no longer carried the weight of fear beneath it. "I used to think fate was cruel," she said quietly. "It took my father, my home, my name. I spent months believing I had nothing left worth protecting, except a wolf no one else would save. And now? Now I think fate simply hadn't finished writing the story yet." She turned to face him fully, the last of the daylight catching gold in eyes that had seen far too much grief for someone so young, and far too much strength to ever be called fragile again. "It took everything from me so it could give me this instead." Ronan reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, the way he had learned to do these past months. Not as an alpha claiming his fated mate, but as a man who had chosen, deliberately and completely, the woman standing beside him. "The Alpha King entered the barn that night, expecting to find a threat," he murmured, more to the memory than to her. Instead, he found the woman who would change his kingdom forever. Bianca leaned into him, watching the last light settle gold over the kingdom they had saved together, and said nothing at all, because nothing needed saying, not anymore. Some stories ended where danger faded and peace began. Theirs was only just starting. If you enjoyed the story, let me know in the comments. Your voice decides what I write next. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more moonlit love stories like this one.